Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing this amazing workshop. It is a pleasure to be here. Today, I am going to present my work, The Path from Automation to Right-Wing Populism, in which I explore how and to what extent the current way of technological change is translating into politics. And in particular, I am trying to understand some of the channels that may be explaining the movement toward illiberal policies, and I am proposing cultural grievances as one possible answer. So some of you have already seen early versions, so hope you still enjoy this. So as we are all aware in this room, or most likely, we know that there is a rise on these type of technologies, and in this case, this is a text editor who has been displaced because of technological change. And I also have examples from my own data collections, for example, this front-end developer, showing that now there is a process of AI displacement that is much bigger than what we saw initially when we were thinking about blue-collar workers. So with this in mind, we also know on the political side that at-risk workers has been declining when we think on the support for the mainstream left, and we also know that it has been increasing the support for the radical right. So basically, when I look at this picture, and it's kind of my main motivation, is trying to understand why is this the case. So basically, why do these exposed workers are turning toward the right and these illiberal policies instead of the left? And in this presentation, when I talk about illiberal policies, I am basically referring to restrictions on trade and immigration. So basically, my main argument, I am suggesting that one of the channels could be that there are non-material consequences that are triggering cultural grievances, and this may explain why we see this movement toward the right. So in particularly, I am thinking about nostalgia and marginalization as possible channels that explain why these illiberal policies are increasing, and we know on the supply side that politicians are using this type of rhetoric. So with this in mind, just a preview, basically in this work I am trying to offer one explanation. As I mentioned, there may be many others, but this will be one. And I start with a simple question of whether the threat of automation is increasing this right-wing populist support and these illiberal policies. And I will try to answer this using a combination of methods, a survey experiment, and also with observational data. And I will show you in this presentation very briefly that I do find support for the increase on trade protectionism and anti-immigration through the experiment and other support through observational data. But overall, I think what is most important from this work is the fact that I am trying to understand what are the mechanisms explaining this. And as I mentioned, I am proposing that cultural grievances may be one of the paths. And I will show you that a relevant proportion of the total effect seems to be explained by this. Of course, there are more channels, but one channel, maybe this one could be one. So this work is speaking to one of the, in my opinion, one of the most important debates in political economy. We spend a lot of time thinking about economics and cultural drivers of populism, and basically my stand on this is that we shouldn't be thinking about this as a horse race, and some of you in this room have been working about this, so basically this work is trying to understand that there is a complementarity between these economic and cultural phenomena. I am proposing nostalgia and marginalization as a channel of cultural grievances, and I am basically suggesting that there are good reasons to believe why these people are moving toward the right. Empirically, in my design, I have a treatment that is thinking not just about blue-collar workers. I am also thinking about displacement because of AI and because of white-collar workers being displaced. And more importantly, I am trying to have a design that is trying to explore the mechanisms. So with this being said, let's go into the argument. I should have said the pictures are all AI created. I really like them. So regarding the argument, very briefly, I think the main point is that automation and these type of economic shocks are having consequences that go beyond material. The material part is important, but there are also non-material consequences. So we know that there is an increase on anxiety, and we also know that this may trigger cultural grievances. And basically, what I am thinking here is nostalgia and marginalization. When we think about nostalgia, if we look at the literature on psychology, we know that it could be a mechanism to cope with changes, but it is also related with this idea of the past was better, even though it may not be the case. For marginalization, basically thinking about this fear of being left out. And basically, when we have these cultural grievances that are triggered, I will expect that there will be a movement toward the right. So you may be asking, why not the left? And here, this is something that I have been thinking a lot, and my short answer will be that these type of economic shocks that are having consequences that are non-materials, maybe less likely that the answer will be appealing when the answers are compensatory policies. So in this kind of non-material shocks, and when these cultural grievances are activated, then more pro-status quo and more of these illiberal policies may be more appealing for these type of exposed workers. And because of that, we know that those who have an advantage, those politicians who have an advantage when exposing these type of liberal policies are right-wing politicians and not left-wing politicians. So just as a summary, we know that automation is going to have important political consequences in behavior, in attitudes, and I am just suggesting that one of the channels will be cultural grievances and basically trying to explore the path. So the empirical implications of this will be that I will look at the overall effect. I will then try to establish the link between automation and these cultural grievances and look at the path. And you will get tired of this picture because I am going to try to go back to it to reference when I am presenting the empirics. So regarding the research design, as I mentioned, there are many arrows that this is a complex phenomenon that we're trying to all understand. So one of the things was either go fully observational or using experiments, and also the second challenge was about how to understand the mechanisms. And if we look at the literature on political science, we have been using mainly what is called measurement of mediation, either completely observationally or randomizing the treatment. But we know that there are many challenges of really identifying relationships when this is the case, and you can see a discussion in a current forthcoming paper by Italo and co-authors, so you can look at that if you're interested in this discussion. But basically, the way I approach to this is combining. So in the paper, I have both approaches, and basically what I have is also a survey experiment that is trying to have a double randomization for the treatment and the mechanisms and the mediator in order to understand, to unpack these mechanisms. And this is a strategy that I borrow from psychology. They have been much advanced than us in this regard. So in the rest of this presentation, I will mainly focus on the survey experiment and those results, but happy to talk in the Q&A or later about the other part. So one of the goals of my design is trying to be realistic, so I am borrowing from previous work on American politics. An idea is, which is like the framing is that I am asking people to assist a new news website in deciding which article to publish. So every person in the experiment will see two news that seems they are trying to imitate something that is real, and they will need to pick up one and basically do some task. I really don't care which one they are picking. It's just an excuse for asking them to read without looking very weird. I am using news adapted from previous works, such as the work that my friend is going to present later, and other works that have been published. So basically, I am just trying to adapt that, and I am focusing on automation risk relative to neutral technology development because I want technology to be part of the baseline and see the reaction of knowing about displacement, how that affects people's decisions. And as I mentioned, it's a design-based experiment. So the first randomization is about the treatment, which is basically assigning people to read either two news about people being displaced because of technology or two news about this way, the control, which is in a more neutral way. And basically, the news are going to be either about robots displacing blue-collar workers or either about AI displacing more white-collar workers. And basically, this randomization allows me to understand the link between the treatment and the outcomes, but also the link between the treatment and the mediators when I measure these variables. So as I mentioned, as you can see here, there is an empty space in between cultural grievances and political behavior, which is the one I am trying to fill up with my second randomization, which is an encouragement of the mediators. And here I can talk more about the framework and the excuse I have for in in the exercise, but basically also borrowing from psychology. What I ask is to do a writing exercise, a very short writing exercise, which basically is triggering this type of emotions, either nostalgia and marginalization, and some people will receive no encouragement. And is this randomization, the encouragement or no encouragement, what allows me to establish this link? So just, you are not going to be able to see this, but basically everyone sees 2 articles, and then there is a task, and then they will see one of these encouragement, not both, and then there is a task about whether they like or not this exercise. So the details I can talk later, but basically the flow is similar to many other survey experiments, so I don't want to spend time on this, but I collected more than 3,000 respondents in the US, and we can talk about details later in the Q&A. So now I will spend the last few minutes presenting you the evidence, and again, I will go back to this plot, and I will try to establish each one of these relationships, and once I have them, I will estimate the mediated causal effect by multiplying the effect of the treatment on the mediator and the mediator on the outcome. So starting by the total effect, what we can see in this picture, basically I am comparing those who were treated relative to those who were in the control. The colors and the shapes basically represent if it is only AI, or the news were only about people being displaced by AI, or robots, or pulling them together. And the y-axis is the outcomes. So the first point I want to make is when we see the effects on the support for Trump, we don't see any difference. And here the answer could be that when we look at the total effect, there may be many channels at play. Now, when we look at trade favorability, we see a decline on it, and we also see an increase on anti-immigration preference for policies. So basically, these two together can be read as there is an increase on preference for these illiberal policies. And as a manipulation check, I am just showing the robot concerns. And a point that you may find interesting is that the anti-immigration is only activated for the robots treatment, not for AI being displaced. So the second point is about the treatment on the mediator. So here we have the effect, I will show you the effect on this cultural grievances measure, and we see that they seem to be increasing once we compare the exposed and the non-exposed. So this basically confirms that the treatment has an effect on the outcome and the mediators, and now we have left to look at whether the cultural grievances encouragement has an effect on political behavior. This is what I'm going to show you here. So the randomization that matters here is the randomization of the encouragement. And just a note, I am doing intention to treat because we cannot really manipulate emotions, so basically, but I can talk more about this later if you want. So basically what we see here is that there is an increase in the support for Trump and also these illiberal policies. So, and in the robot concerns, in this case, it shouldn't have moved and it doesn't move, so basically we see that cultural grievances seems to be related to these illiberal policy outcomes. So now that we have all the relationships, we can wrap up basically with the mediated effects. So as at the beginning, I showed you that there is no effect directly from Trump in the total effect. So if there is any effect, it could be through the cultural grievances, but more importantly for the illiberal policies that I call for trade favorability and anti-immigration. Basically, we see that there is an increase on these illiberal policies, and when we put this in context, basically comparing these mediated effects through the total effect, we see that a relevant part seems to be explained through this channel. And I confirm this using the typical measure of the typical mediation analysis based on observables and also with observational data. So now, wrapping up this presentation, I think that the most important message will be that there are these non-material consequences, and in particular that automation seems to be triggering these cultural grievances, such as marginalization and nostalgia, and these cultural grievances may have consequences on politics, as presented in the evidence. They may increase the support for Trump and illiberal policies. And then the third point is that part of the effect, at least when we think about these illiberal policies, seems to be explained by this channel. So, if you want to remember something about this work, I think that this idea that we must take these grievances seriously and understand that they go beyond the material. So this will help us understand why sometimes the left is having a hard time because of these non-material consequences that may not be, the solution may not be exactly the same as what you would think if it is only material. So thank you so much. Looking forward for your comments.
Good job, because you took exactly 15 minutes.
15:06.
Yeah, so that's great. Okay, so we're gonna have 10 minutes of Q&A for Valentina. So, what? No. Do we have a microphone? Okay, great. So please raise your hand if you have a question. So do we have a microphone? Oh, are you gonna go around or?
You pick, you know. Use the microphone.
Okay, so do we want to start with Jason?
Hi, thank you. Very interesting paper. I was particularly intrigued by the anti-immigration effect that you found. Did you have any way to distinguish between anti-immigration sentiment towards skilled versus unskilled immigrants? And I was wondering if you could speak to how you might explain the anti-immigration effects more elaborately.
I think we should collect a few. Should we collect a few questions and then she answers? So that, yeah, I think so. So we have one over here.
Hi, very interesting paper. So I have a similar question as the one previously made, but like for the trade side, actually. So it was a little bit puzzling to me to see an effect of AI regarding trade favorability falling. So I was wondering how can we explain that on the one hand, and on the other hand, I wonder if like the grievances are driven by workers of a very particular type. Like if you look at heterogeneous effects, what are the types of workers that are actually reacting in the way that is related to your mechanism? Thank you.
Let's do one more and then.
Thank you. So I'm wondering whether you explored a panel of right-wing coded as well as left-wing coded policies to just see the balance effects and whether there might be support for any left coded, such as in particular the labor movement could be one outlet for these types of grievances, but I'm wondering whether you tested that or other types of left coded things where they could potentially have an effect.
Great, now we'll give Valentina some time to respond.
Good. So I will go in the order. It is very high. So regarding the anti-immigration, I have been thinking about this, but when I run the experiment, I don't have like a way to differentiate if it is high skill or low skill anti-immigration. But the question is about legal immigrants. So the legal immigrants are more likely to be skilled, but it's not. I cannot say like it is particularly. I am really particularly capturing that. It is a question about legal immigrants, but you can have still legal immigrants that may not be skilled, but that's the closest I can be with the data I have. But yeah, I think it's important to look at these differences. Regarding Felipe, so regarding the type of the heterogeneous effects, I have explored the heterogeneous effects. I mean, it wasn't in the pre-registration, but I have done that as a fun thing in my own. And basically, the effect may be slightly stronger among those who are lower in income and some characteristics that may be more related to low-skilled workers, but it's not really statistically significant, the difference in the effects. The magnitude seems to be slightly larger for them, but they are still not statistically different, these groups. But I do have controls for all of that, so that hopefully that shouldn't be a problem given the randomization. And regarding trade, I think that basically it's more like a reaction, like a non-material reaction that I just want to be close and some kind of economic nationalism independent on like even if it is AI displacement, I think that the reaction is still similar, like some economic nationalism. That's what I am thinking in this particular case. So basically the cultural grievances will be just one path for economic nationalism, even if it is robots or AI displacement. And regarding question for the left wing, yeah, I don't know if I fully understand the comment, but I think what you are thinking is if I have policy preferences that are more like left wing oriented, and I have, for instance, the typical: will you want to tax to tax the rich? And I don't see any difference on that. And if anything, it is with some of the controls, like changing controls, sometimes it is the opposite. Like there is an increase on the support of taxing the rich, which is something that I will have expected at least it could happen. Like the reaction seems to be more into moving to economic nationalism instead. Yeah, of course.
I really enjoyed your paper. I think one question I had was, to me, theoretically, there might be a difference between automation and AI in the sense that, and I never quite understood how much you use the term interchangeably or not, because I think the big difference is that AI is likely to displace, at least this newest wave, more highly skilled cognitive type of workers, right? And I imagine that the causal chain toward political behavior for highly skilled workers might be entirely different, right? They might not turn to the far right, at least theoretically. I would imagine that they're more likely to turn to some kind of retraining policies and maybe more like center-right type of politics. So I wonder if at least theoretically there should be two different mechanisms for the types of reactions that the shock would trigger, even though then empirically it might not be the case, even though I don't know if you would have the power to do that interaction.
Right.
But I think theoretically, I would imagine the story to be different as to what a shock would trigger in terms of policy preferences and political behavior. I don't know if this makes sense.
Right. Initially, what I was thinking is that at the end, in both cases, we have people feeling that they are going to be left out, even if they are middle class, white collar workers, or if they are blue collar workers. In fact, if we look at works on unions, maybe the blue collar workers are even less scared than the white collar workers because they have less to lose and also they have probably more organization. But in terms of the empirics, I don't see differences, but I could keep exploring like interactions. So far I have done like stratified things and I don't see like strong differences, but I could explore some interaction effects. Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you.
One more question here.
It just prompted a thought that's relative to Los Angeles specifically, where you were mentioning that possibly white-collar. Thank you. White-collar workers might be more concerned than blue-collar workers because AI might affect them more. We live in a city full of people that are on essentially vanity projects. They, are going to produce the next great movie, produce the great next Spotify hit.
Right.
But something that was at the beginning of your presentation, fear of lack of recognition in society, and then you closed with that, where not being able to survive, not the tech. I think this is really what we're seeing right now with AI, and I think your opening remarks about the shift from fear of robots to fear of what we're seeing, like last night's news about Strawberry. So doesn't this really help or focus on defining what makes us human? Because that recognition in society really ties to a feeling of what makes us human. So when we look at what AI is producing in the arts, images, music, writing, analysis of today's papers through ChatGPT, it really raises the question of what makes me human if these machines can do things that I did every day, I labored over every day, whether it's an image, a song, or just analyzing today's presentations. Kind of ties in with what you're closing with. It's not so much nostalgia, but the marginalization of like, where's my recognition in society going to come from? And I don't know that your paper addressed or your experiment addressed that specifically, but the comment about white versus blue collar probably hits on that specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that, and I think the examples that I have, for instance, the text editor that is now walking dogs, that's probably if his main work was about, his definition of work was being a text editor and have a good, decent work, and now he's just working for others by walking their dogs, there is a lack of recognition there. Regarding the nostalgia path, this is based on many literature on psychology, that basically when there are these type of shocks, people become more nostalgic in their feelings as a mechanism to cope with the change. But it is I think probably the marginalization is much more stronger, and that's the right. But the other one is more like a mechanism that people may use in times of crisis to cope with that, yeah.
So I think we're going to have to move on to the next paper, but save your questions. We're going to have 15 more minutes for general Q&A in a bit.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Valentina. Now I'm going to introduce